So when building a one-piece guitar, the hardest part is finding a piece of wood that is wide enough. There used to be quite a bit of a selection of wood at hardwood stores. But ever since the economy kind of took a dive in the early 2000s, a lot of the lumber suppliers, they don't carry really wide stock anymore, and it's difficult to find. So that's one of the hardest things. And after you find a width that is going to work, the next thing is trying to find a piece that is going to work for a one-piece guitar. There's a few things that if you make sure that you follow these rules, you'll never have a problem with building a one-piece guitar as far as warpage and twistage and things like that. The very first thing is you want to try to find a piece of wood that has got very straight grain. Okay, now this piece right here, because I know exactly what I'm doing, I can use this piece, but ideally this is not the best piece to use, simply because of this right here. Okay, everything else I can work with. This right here is the only concern, and it's in a critical spot. It's in the neck. Okay, so but let's examine this piece of wood. Now this is Carina, and when people order a Carina guitar, they a lot of times they want to have it where it's got some type of design, it's got some type of figure to it. And the very first thing that I look at, like I mentioned before, is the direction of the grain. I do not want to see grain that is doing things like this across the board. That is a bad sign. It should be fairly straight. And if we look at this, we can see that even though it's kind of wavy, for the most part, it's fairly straight. On Carina, we're going to see that this part is dark and this part is white. This is what would be known as black limba. This portion would be known as what is white limba. It comes from the same tree. The difference between the two is just how close to the core of the tree it is. Okay, this is closer to the core, and we'll be able to kind of see that if we look at the very edge of it. If we look at the edge, we can kind of see how this is somewhat curved right here, and you're going to end up seeing that on a lot of different kinds of woods. When you start getting closer to the center of the wood, you're going to start seeing a difference in not only the color, but a lot of times the properties of the wood, and you got to be kind of careful about that, because densities of wood are going to react differently to moisture. Okay, in other words, if I have a very porous soft piece, let's just say here in the center, which this is not, but let's just say that it is, but the outside is a very dense, hard piece, the center is going to absorb more moisture easier, right, than the outside. And when it does, when things absorb moisture, they expand, right? When they lose moisture, they contract. And so something like this, even though that this is fine, because I've looked at the wood really close on this to make sure that I can get away with using this. On something like this, let's just say for the sake of argument, if this was porous here and out here what's not, what could potentially happen is this portion expands, which would cause this to kind of want to bend a little bit this way. Okay, that's not good. We want this to be stable. Okay, now this is pretty, the density on this all the way across is fine. And I don't have a piece of wood around here that I could show you that would be exactly what I'm talking about, because when I go out and I purchase wood, I always want to purchase stuff that I can use, not stuff that I can't. But it's important to look at the wood that you're getting ready to purchase and look for consistency. Okay, sometimes you'll find it where this side over here is actually like maybe really porous and light, different color, soft. Over here is dense. Okay, that's something you'd want to avoid. Not only for stability, but also for sheer comfort of it and balance of the guitar. Because if we have something on this side that's really heavy and this side over here it's not, it might make the guitar feel a little out of balance, you know, to the person that is going to play it. But if we look at, once again, if we're looking at the grain, it should be fairly straight, and you should be laying out your guitar in the direction of the grain the best way that you can. Okay. Once again, if you start seeing grain go in strange directions like this across it, you can't really use that piece of wood. Okay. You could probably get away with it, okay, but you're taking a risk. As we start cruising up, we start seeing that we get close to what looks like a knot. Okay, so this is where a branch would have been coming out of this piece of wood, and this is going to be harder and denser than what's going on over here. Okay, now I don't see an actual knot. Okay, it looks like the beginning of a forming of one, but I don't actually see one, and then that's the thing that makes me say this is going to be okay. As well as, a lot of times you're going to find pieces of wood that are highly figured. They're going to have a lot of color. And that's one of the things that people really like about all natural wood guitars, is being able to see the grain, right? So you don't always have the luxury of having an absolute perfect solid color piece of wood and the grain is, you know, perfectly straight. You don't always get that option. Sometimes, you know, you just have to build the guitar out of whatever the person would want the guitar made out of. But same rules apply. Trying to keep the grain as even as possible. This is a potential problem area, okay? But as we start cruising up a little bit more, okay, it kind of starts evening itself out a little bit. We have some stuff going on right here that's not too fantastic, because it kind of curves a little bit right here where this is straight. Okay, not real fantastic, but this isn't an area that's not overly important. Okay, I'm also going to get into something else here in a second, but just because the top here looks like, okay, we could probably end up using this, it's not ideal. This is not an ideal piece, but it's going to work just fine. We have to look at the rear as well, okay? And we're going to see that that area that I was concerned with the knot right here, okay, we can see that. This is more of a knot. Okay, now the reason why I say that this area is going to be okay, now this is 1 3/4 thick of wood. The neck itself does not go down 1 3/4, right? It's only about 3/4, 7/8 of an inch thick. And because of that, there's going to be a large portion of the rear of this that's going to be removed. So this portion is not going to be close to the actual rear of the neck, where the neck profile is. If we start cruising down here, this is where the body is. It doesn't have all that figuring, right, that we saw on the top. And you can see that this is a little bit more stable. This is a little bit more consistent. It's wavy, but it's going to be okay. Okay, we cruise down here. Once again, this is a little bit of a trouble area, just because of this guy right here, but it's going to work out, and I'm going to explain why here in a second. We come up here, and up where the headstock is, this is much better down here. Okay, but the headstock doesn't go all the way down here either. But you want to look at both sides, because sometimes on one side everything's going to look really nice, and then you turn it over, and the other side you're going to be like, I can't use it. You know, if we saw a huge knot right here, like, I mean, not like this, but like an actual knot, I couldn't use this. It would be too risky for me to try to use this. If this piece was wider and the grain was kind of going a little bit more this direction, I could actually turn my design this way toward the grain and bypass that. So anytime that you see a flaw in the wood, you want to see if you can bypass it if you have a piece that's big enough, or even maybe just kind of shifting the template a little bit back and forth this way. Now, one of the reasons why I know that this is going to end up okay is because it's not really that severe. Okay, it's not ideal, but it's not severe. And it's actually going to end up adding some interest to the person because they're going to be able to see it on the rear of the neck. And it's going to create a neat pattern down the back of the neck, which people are actually going to end up liking. Okay? Now, curing the wood. Okay? A lot of times when you buy wood, there's a lot of moisture in it. There's a lot of moisture. And many hardwood suppliers, they do cure wood, but a lot of times the wood is just sitting out, open, and any moisture in the air is going to absorb inside the wood. And what you want to do is you want to find a piece, if possible, that seems light for its size. Okay, Karina, this is a heavy piece of wood. Okay, and as I start cutting pieces off of it, it's obviously going to lighten up quite a bit. But because of its properties, it's going to be heavy. And when I first got this, there was a decent amount of water in it. This has been sitting in the shop for at least 8 or 9 months. And it's just been in here drying, basically. There's some people that will dry wood for years, okay? I don't really think it's necessary. As soon as the wood is cured, you don't have to take it any further. Okay, you don't have to keep doing years and years. There's some people, it's like, well, I use pieces of wood that have been curing for like 10 years. That's fine and dandy, but it's not required. Okay, it's not necessary. And you also need to make sure that as soon as you start working with wood, you start paying close attention to what is happening with the pieces that you cut off. And I'm going to explain this here when we actually start doing it. But let's say I start taking the bandsaw to this and I start cutting this. If I start noticing that this piece is wanting to kind of lock the blade in after I've cut it, starting to want to block the blade, or maybe it's wanting to start veering away this way, it's telling me that there's internal tension within the wood. It also is telling me that there might be some moisture inside there. Okay, it's hard to say. I won't know until I actually cut it and I can look at it and see what's going on. But if you start seeing things like that, that's a warning sign. That is a warning sign that you might end up having a neck that's going to twist. Okay, that's why it's so important. It's so important to make sure that your wood is cured. Okay, whether it's mahogany, Carina, or whatever. I have pieces of mahogany that are in the shop that have been sitting in here for years. Okay, and you can tell the difference when you cut a fresh piece that's got moisture in it compared to when you haven't. Like when it doesn't have any moisture or it's got a very low moisture content, you can tell. Here's something else. Now, you can get a moisture meter if you want. You say, well, how do I know it's been cured long enough? The wood feels different. I mean, now I've been doing this a long time, so I can kind of tell. I can put my hand on it. I can tell. I mean, I can lift it. I can tap it. I can do all sorts of stuff to tell what kind of moisture's in it. But if you're new to this, you can get a moisture meter for wood. They're cheap, $15 or so, and you just put it's got 2 needles. Just stick it inside there and wait to see what the reading is. And when it says that it's about 10% or less, 15% or less, it's usually good enough to work with. With guitars like this, okay, with a one piece, there's actually 2 curing stages. There's 2 curing stages, and this is one of the reasons why building a one piece sometimes takes longer, because sometimes you have to do 2 cures. Okay, the first cure is like this in its solid state. Okay, like you haven't cut anything out of it. That can take months. Okay, sometimes you can purchase it and it's cured already, but it can take months. So that's the first. Then the second is what I do is I end up cutting it out, a rough cut, okay, where I've got about a 1/2 inch or so, maybe. It depends on it. It kind of depends on what I'm doing here, but I make sure that it's larger than it needs to be, and I cut it, and then I examine the moisture content of the wood. If the moisture content is high through the side after I've cut it, then I have to let that blank cure. until it reaches a moisture level that is acceptable. And that's the reason why you make it a little bit larger than it needs to be. So if it does twist just a little bit, you still have room to go ahead and cut the guitar out, and everything can still be straight. If I try to cut this, you know, an 1/8 inch away and it needs to be cured more, I've screwed myself. Okay, so there's 2 initial cuts, and what we're going to do is this particular guitar. I have a typical Gelvin design here that I have on here that I use for an OGS and stuff. You're going to see that it kind of goes a little bit beyond the edge, but I'm not going to be actually using this design. I was just trying to make sure that this is going to be big enough to make a guitar. I'm going to be using an Orion template on this guitar right here, and if I need to ever so slightly just change, you know, a curve on both sides, then I'm going to do that in order to make this happen. Ideally, this would go out further, but once again, it's really hard to find pieces of wood big enough to build a guitar out of. So here's an Orion template, and when I put my Orion template here, there's about 3/16 of an inch that hangs off the sides. This side is maybe a 1/16 of an inch. This side right here might be an 1/8 to 3/16. That's fine, because I can just do a little bit of fancy sanding right there and make that happen. Okay. If the wood is wide enough, obviously we wouldn't have that problem, and sometimes you can get away with turning like ever so slightly this way depending on the shape of the wood. In this case I can't. Okay, so we're going to end up putting this right here. That's fine, and we know the length is going to be okay. Now, as far as the templates go, I have videos in the guitar building course where I show how to build templates. You know, so I'm not going to be covering that in this video. But if you want to know how to make templates and design a guitar and all that other stuff, doesn't matter, even a bass, doesn't matter, you can get the guitar building course, and that goes over everything. But it doesn't go over building one-piece guitars. So this is going to fit. I have everything set here. Okay, so this is going to fit just fine. So, but before I start doing this, what I want to do, I'm going to remove this, is I need to create a center line. Okay, and center lines are so important when you build guitars, because you need a reference line. I'm trying to find dead center here. Now I'm going to take a long yardstick, and you want to use a metal one, and I've got center already on my template here, and I'm going to be holding this and cruising down. Now see this edge right here, I still have a little bit of room next to the edge. This is the center. Okay, so it cruises this way, and you're going to see that I'm kind of bypassing some of this knot. Okay, this part right here is the part I'm worried about compared to this portion of it, because I know that this center is going to be harder than right there. Okay, so by taking this, making sure that it's centered, okay, I'm bypassing that, and technically I can even ever so slightly turn the body to help bypass even more of that. Okay, as long as trying to keep everything center. Okay, we're okay there. I also don't want to twist this so much, put an angle on this so much that the grain is going to start going in a funky direction and potentially causing the guitar to twist or warp. Okay. Now there's something that's really important that I need to cover on this. There is absolutely no reason at all for a one-piece guitar to warp or twist, as long as the moisture content is correct and as long as the grain is fairly straight. Even if it's not straight, it still does not mean it's going to twist. It's all about how you cure the wood. And there's people out there that build one-piece guitars, but they don't cure the wood properly, and it twists all the time. Or what they'll do is they'll put 4 or 5 different types of like truss rods and stuff like that in order to try to make sure that it doesn't twist. You do not have to do that. Okay, if you know what you're doing, you do not have to do that. It's all about curing the wood. It's all about trying to find a good straight grain. Now in this particular case, okay, I'm not going to have it veer off this far. Okay, a couple of reasons. One reason is because I want this pattern, this cool pattern of the black fading into the white, I want it to be more centered in the body. Second, I'm not really overly worried about this area that's kind of a knot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it somewhat centered of this portion. There'll be a very small amount of this that will go into the neck, but I want this to be centered. Okay. So by putting this right about there, okay, I think I can meet both requirements here. Let me make sure that this is where I want it. Make sure that that's where I want it. Okay, and now from here I'm going to take a pencil. Down here I'm going to make a line. Okay, you can't see it, so let me just go like this. I'm going to make a line so I can see that there. And I'm going to make a line up in here. And I'm going to send this through from there to, I believe, it's right there. Okay. Basically right here, I'm going to make a straight line that goes all the way through this. Okay? And now I'm going to extend it this way. It's kind of hard to see, but I'm going to extend it from point A, point B, all the way through. Okay? So that's the first thing. I'm going to grab a Sharpie, and now I'm going to line up, and on my templates I have center lines. Okay, so but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the center line of my template here, and I'm going to also line up the center line to my neck template, which is about right there. Okay, so we have center there and center there. Okay, so this is lined up. The center of my neck is now lined up with the center of my guitar body, and this is for an Orion, so an Orion would have a separate neck that would be set, but in this case I'm going to do it like this. We're going to be good. I have another template for an OPS where everything is connected and I don't have to do this, but this works just fine. So now from here I'm going to take the Sharpie and I'm going to go around the outside of this, being careful to kind of give myself at least 3/16 of an inch, perhaps a little bit more, all the way around it, because I don't want to cut beyond this, because I need to make sure that the wood on the inside is cured enough. Okay, so there we go. Okay, now that is what I cut out with the bandsaw. And what's great about this is I'm going to have leftover pieces of carina that I can make a body out of. Perhaps 2359, maybe an Orion, who knows, but I'm going to have leftover pieces and I can make another guitar body out of it, so it's not wasted. That's, you know, that's the one thing about building one piece, or like my OGS, I'm going to have leftover wood, and then I always use that to build another body. And as I mentioned in my guitar building course, it's such common practice to glue pieces of wood together to make a body. There is no benefit to a body that is one piece only instead of like two pieces or three pieces. There is no benefit other than aesthetics. That's it. When it comes to a one-piece guitar, the benefit has nothing to do with the tone. It has to do with the dynamics of the guitar. And I have been stressing this and telling this to people for years now. It's not going to change the tone any. You're not going to have some magic tone, but the dynamics change. You're going to notice that the harmonics are a little bit different. You're going to notice the attack is different. You're going to notice that the sustain is dramatically different. But the actual tone of it is not based on the build of this, okay? It just changes the dynamics. And one-piece guitars, generally, most people, I do not recommend purchasing a one-piece guitar because they're expensive. And unless you are a studio musician and you use your guitar for a living and you can appreciate the difference in dynamics, there's really no reason to do it, okay? But for those that are professionals and stuff like that, the ones that have played one-piece guitars, at least mine, they swear by them. They're like, this is great, because it gives the performance that they're looking for. To a intermediate or a normal player, they probably aren't going to notice that difference because they're not as keen. They're not as sharp when it comes to the performance of a guitar. They can't really feel or hear the difference, and they haven't even mastered their playing technique, and because of that they don't really know how to control a guitar and make the guitar do what they want it to do. So typically I don't recommend it to just, beginners or whatnot. But anyway, that is that, and that's important to know. So let's go ahead and cut this out on the bandsaw. And I'm not going to be cutting exactly on the red line. I'm going to get close to it, but I'm not going to cut it out exactly on the red line. And then from there, we're going to test the moisture from the side, where out here, if I tested it, it might say it's fine. But we don't know about what's going on in the middle of this piece of wood. I mean, this is 1 3/4 inches. So let me take this to the bandsaw, cut it out, and then I'll be back. So let's talk a little bit about the internal tension. I started cutting this out. This side was fine, right? No problems. But when I started taking the bandsaw down this way, okay, you'll see that there's a certain thickness of where the blade has been cutting right here. But as we start coming down this direction, this is closing up. It's not the same thickness right here, okay, which is saying that this wood is wanting to bend this direction. Okay, and that's telling me that there's some internal tension within this. It's not a lot, okay? It's not a lot. If this was really starting to like squeeze really tight where it was even hard for me to cut, at that point I'd start being concerned, because it would be telling me there's a potential that this neck might go out of whack. This side I had no problems. This side is nice and stable. Okay, this side on the other hand, ever so slightly some internal tension. And this has to do with grain patterns. This has to do with moisture content. This has to do with a lot of different things. But this is something that you need to kind of keep an eye on. If it's extreme, it should be a warning flag. If it's ever so slight like this, it's going to be okay, more than likely. But it's something to keep an eye on. So now that I've got this cut, we're going to go ahead and test it with that moisture meter that I was talking about. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get this and kind of jam this into the wood, and I'm not really getting a reading there. Okay, now let me jam it into the side and see if we get a reading. And I'm not really getting a reading, which means that this is well cured. Okay, now the further that you drive this in, the better, but you don't necessarily need to do that. And this works off of resistance, right? So let me grab a rag, take some Windex, okay, and spray it on here. Now watch what happens when I put this to here. Okay, so it really does pick up moisture. And I'm also poking in areas that no one is going to see. The last thing I'd want to do is poke over here, because this is going to be exposed. When I do the side, it's the exact same thing. I'm putting it in a spot that I'm not worried about it getting damaged. So that is that, and we know now that this is cured. I don't have to worry about this really warping anymore. If I started seeing a high level of moisture, I would set this, I'd put this to the side and let it sit for a few weeks and then test it again. The last thing that I'd want to do is start shaping this, because if I did, I might have a ruined guitar. Like I said before, hard to find the wood, okay? It's expensive, and you know, you being in a rush can damage it if you're not willing to let it cure. And it's really important to do that. But this is nice and solid, we're good to go. And because of that, now I know that I can go ahead, put the template back up here, and now cut everything all the way around this to where I'm only about 1/8 of an inch away from the actual line that I need to cut. I'm going to use a different color this time. But I'm going to make sure that I'm only about 1/8 of an inch away. So that way when I run it through my router's not working really hard, and it's also going to help prevent chip out. Okay, so I went ahead and I cut it. I got about 1/8 of an inch. It's all the way around. In some cases a little bit more, in some cases a little bit less. The closer to that 1/8 of an inch, the better. Put my template back on, making sure that I didn't overcut or there's any areas that are too large. Because if it's too large, it's going to increase the chance of chip out, as well as it's going to end up make the process a little bit longer. So now it's time for me to go ahead and attach my template to the top of the guitar here. And this is going to go through the router. And in my guitar building course, I kind of go over all of this stuff. But you're going to get a gist of it here. Basically using some double-stick tape, double-sided tape, lining this up once again with center, making sure that I'm just right there. So that's the first part. Now we got to do the neck. Put this here. Okay, let me verify that everything is lined up. And we're good. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about what kind of router bit I'm going to be using. And I'm basically going to be using this right here with this 1/2 inch collet. And if you look at the router bit, you're going to notice it's not perfectly straight up and down like a typical flute, kind of like that one that's straight up and down. This is going to wreck your wood. This is going to destroy it. Don't use that. It's got a bearing up here that this is going to follow the template, and because this is at a slight angle, it's going to give a cleaner cut. And they call this up shear or down shear when you purchase this. But this is going to end up cutting the entire piece of wood all at once, and it's going to give a really nice clean finish. I might get a little chip out. It's hard to say. I'm going to do everything I can to avoid it. There's tricks you can do to avoid that, but sometimes it happens. And I'm going to use the router tape. I'm going to turn the speed of this down, because I don't want this router bit to be traveling really fast. Router bit size as well as speed, you have to know what you're doing, because if not, you can end up creating problems, getting chip out, causing burns, dulling your blades. Larger the bit, the slower you should go. That speed right there is just fine. And now I'm going to start in an area that there is no wood, this area that's kind of missing some wood, so it's a little bit more of a gradual cut. Now, many times when you're cutting out your guitar with your router bit, you're going to see what a beautiful job that does right there. Okay, a lot of times areas like this are going to be trouble areas that you're going to get chip out. Okay, a lot of times it's in places like this, once again here, and also here. That's typically where you're going to see it. And there's also some spots on the headstock that you're going to end up seeing it. And you'll notice that I kind of pulled this off, and that's because there's a big chunk of wood right here, and I didn't want to try to keep forcing it around. When I start hearing the router start kind of, I don't want to call it chipping, but as soon as I start hearing it kind of make some funny noises, it tells me I need to slow down, look at what's going on, because there's a good chance that something is going to kick, or there's a good chance that I'm going to get chip out. So let's go ahead and start it up again. Starting back here once again. Now I'm hearing that slight kick. It tells me I need to come this direction and push it at a different angle. Now I'm stopping here because this is going to be another area that there is a potential for chip out, okay? And it's important that when you're running it through your router that you apply pressure in the right direction, right? I want to push up against this hard enough to keep the bit close to the wood, but not so hard that I'm going to be like tipping the table either. And I want to change the position of the guitar occasionally to make sure that I have full control over this. If there's going to be chip out anywhere, it's going to happen right here on this edge. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what happens. I'm going very slow. We're coming up to another trouble area. Now, this section at the very tip of my headstock is a trouble area. This, a lot of times, will kick. I'm dealing with cutting end grain, as well as I have a sharp turn. Sometimes, depending on what the blade is doing, if it's reacting in a bad way, I'll leave this alone and then I'll just use a sander later on to put that curve in. Okay, but it's gonna. I need to cut this side right here, and best way for me to do it is use the router. So let's go ahead. If I take it slow, I might be able to do it. So now I've got to try to go around that corner. I'm going to get some of this stuff out of my way because this section I'm going to be cutting end-grained once again, and I want to change the position of the guitar so that way I have more control over it, because this is going to be an area that is really going to grab. This is a potential problem right here. We're going to end up seeing if we can make this work. Let's get all this stuff and get it out of the way. So this I won't need until it's time for me to put the neck profile on, but need to kind of clean this surface off a little bit here. Okay, so while we still have the template on here, this is when we're going to go ahead and route out what we're going to route out here, and also we can mark where our holes are going to be. I'm not going to be marking where the holes are here yet, because of the way that the one-piece guitar is. I have to do that a little bit later after the after the headstock has been shaped. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my router, and this is going to be a handheld router, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to route out my cavities. And I think this particular guitar, I'm not going to put a center pickup. I think I'm only going to put humbucker bridge, humbucker neck. Now what I'm using here is a template bit. This has got a bearing up here, and this is ½ inch wide, and I just go down and I use this until it's the proper depth. And this is a plunge router, so the speed on this is higher than I would use for the sides. It's a smaller bit. Empty the cavities out and then go for another pass. Let me just make sure that I didn't miss anything. And let's do another pass. And this is going to be about 3/4 of an inch deep. So now at this point, I can always put the template back on a little bit later to do these holes. But now at this point, I'm going to remove the template and I'm going to continue doing my routing for the cavities here. This is going to be a hardtail, so I would not need to route this out. Before I remove it, I'm going to make sure that I make a center line, because I'm going to need this for my truss rod, as well as up here where the nut goes. I'm going to be marking it, so that way I know where to place my bridge as well as my fretboard. And if you're wondering why I have this little notch here, it's because this is where I adjust my truss rod. I need to have the room. So now we're good here, okay? So I'm going to leave the exact same bit on because now we're going to have to put a back angle on the neck, okay? Let me just kind of move this back and forth to take some of the sawdust off of the table here. But if I were to just leave this exactly as it is right here, the problem is the neck would be perfectly straight. And after I put my fretboard on, you would see that it would basically only be, the height of the string would basically only be a hair more than the fretboard. And we have to have a slight back angle to raise it up this way, so that way when we put the bridge here, there's room, right? Because if not, I'll have to countersink the bridge in order to make this work. And so that's the reason why you put a back angle on a neck. And the way that I go about doing that is I built a jig, and I talk about jigs in the video about tips and jigs and stuff like that, which is part of the guitar building course. And right now, all of this right here is going to kind of disappear because I need to put a back angle. And let me get my jig out. And the jig is basically just some MDF that has been cut at a slight back angle that goes all the way down the neck here. And what I'm going to do is clamp this to, I'm going to have to adjust the camera here. So I have this side of the jig clamped, okay, so this doesn't move too much. And this has got a back angle to it. So when I start running my router over the top of it, it's going to cut the top of this at a downward angle, which is exactly what I need it to do. The difference in back angle here, if I were to measure roughly where the nut is, okay, I've got about 7/8 of an inch. And if I come up here and I measure it up to where the pickup is, I'm dealing with right around maybe an inch and a 1/16, okay? So we're basically only dealing with about 3/16 of an inch of a back angle, which is actually more than enough, okay? So let me take my straight edge here, and I'm going to run it down the side of the neck so I know where to stop routing, because I don't want to go into the body. I only want this to be where the fretboard sets. So setting the router blade, the router bit, setting it to the exact height of what is down here, okay, not down here, but what is down here. Now when I run this back and forth, it's going to give me that perfect back angle, and it's going to be nice and straight. Okay, so now that I've got this, I'm going to do one more pass, because right here it's flat. I didn't bring it down quite low enough, and so I'm only going to lower this about 1/16 of an inch, and I'm going to do the exact same thing again. Okay, so now that I have put a back angle on this, what I've done is I've marked where the nut is going to sit, or the end of the fretboard, and I've also marked a center line on this. I have another jig here that I've built that my router will set right inside here, nice and tight. It keeps the guitar centered, and then I set my router bit to the depth of whatever truss rod I'm going to be using, and in this case I'm going to be using this truss rod here, which is almost 3/8 of an inch deep. And this, when you route your truss rod, everything needs to be very stationary, and you also need to make sure that your router cannot veer, because when you're doing your truss rod, this thing needs to be as straight as you can possibly make it. So you need to go slow. If you need to do more than one pass, do it. Whatever it takes to make sure that everything is perfectly straight and it's dead center. I've got everything lined up inside the jig here, and I've got this set to the proper depth. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly, I've already done some test cuts up here to make sure that I've got the right depth, and I'm going to slowly cruise down. Now, one more thing is the length of the truss rod. Now, the way that I've got mine is I adjust my truss rod through the neck pickup area, so I need to know where to stop. And in this particular case, I'm going to be stopping right there. Okay? And you'll see that the router sits really tight inside this jig. Now, before I remove the jig, I need to make sure that this is actually the correct depth. So let me clean some of this out here. And that's what I was using my set of calipers for, was to set the depth. I can make sure that it's right. But this needs to set right in there. Now, this is maybe a 64th of an inch too shallow, okay? But that's perfect, because that 64th of an inch is because of this and because of this. So those two areas I can either route out deeper, or I can just use a chisel to slightly deepen that area to kind of lock that in place. And then that way I know that this truss rod is going to be nice and stationary. It's not going to wiggle around inside the truss rod cavity here. So I'm going to call the depth of this good. There's a section up here I'm going to route out a little bit more, and I'm also going to use a larger router bit, so that way it can accommodate this section right here. And then as soon as I'm done doing that, I'll take this out of the jig and I'll show you the next step. So now that I've got this routed out, I'm going to take my truss rod here, set it in the way that I need it to go in, and there's going to be a couple of sections that this is not going to want to slide in there, simply because of the width of this Allen key right here, as well as where it's been soldered. And so what I'm going to do is I want to make sure, though, that this is the correct depth, and it is. Everything is golden. I'm going to bring this over to about right there, and I'm going to now mark this section, because I need to route this section out bigger so I can make sure I can get my Allen wrench inside there. This is 1/4 of an inch, so I'm going to actually extend this 1/4 inch on both sides. So now that that is done, I'm going to go ahead and test the fit of the truss rod. There we go. And that should work. That should work. So now, one thing that I did do that I haven't talked about yet is here on the top, I went ahead and I cut a slight back angle on it with a bandsaw. That was so it can fit inside my jig. But at the same time, this is about the back angle that I'm going to be using. So a little bit later I'm going to end up taking my belt sander to this and evening this out. But right now that's not overly important. What is important, though, is now we got to do our fretboard. And our fretboard is going to be going on before we do the neck radiusing on the rear, or I should say the neck profile. And I've already got a fretboard made out of ebony ready to roll. I've got some abalone inlay already on here, and I haven't done anything on the side because I have to trim this. Now we're going to take care of the fretboard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a piece of double stick tape here and here, and I have a fretboard that I've already put some abalone in for some fret markers, not for the sides, only for the top. And what we're going to do, and fret slots have already been cut and everything. Now all of this stuff I go over in the guitar building course. That's why I'm not going over it now. I've got my area right here that I have marked for where this ends. I'm going to center this, okay, right where that belongs, and I'm going to center up here as well. Okay, that should be centered, and let me verify because I'm only going to get one shot at this. Okay, center, center, center. Okay, so now that this is put into place where I want it, I'm going to turn this over, and where the fretboard is extending, take a pencil, which is kind of hard to see when you're cutting, but pretty much works the best. And then now that that has been put on there, I'm going to end up taking this off, which incidentally sometimes take out the truss rod. But now I need to extend the line that I had drawn there with the Sharpie all the way down the fretboard. And I'm going to take this to the bandsaw, and I'm going to cut this about maybe a 1/16 away from that line, because what I'm going to do afterwards is I'm going to run this over my joiner to get the sides perfectly straight and flat. So when I place this on here, it's dead money, it's perfect. So let me take this to the bandsaw and cut these two lines. Okay, so now that I've got the rear of this cut, I ran it through my joiner after I cut it out, and I kept working it in very small increments until this basically is setting almost perfectly flush. There's a couple of little small areas that aren't exactly right, but it's okay because when I start shaping the neck profile on it, all that's going to be taken care of. But right now the important thing is this is right, and this is continuing down this direction. Very nice. Okay, so I can't glue this on yet. Now what I need to do is I need to put my radius on the fretboard. I can do that after I glue it, but the way that I do mine nowadays, it's so much faster, it's more accurate than using the sanding blocks. And once again, I go over all this in the guitar building course. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my radius on the fretboard, which is also going to take care of the inlay to make it just right. Before I glue it on it, after I put my radius is when I can put my side dots on, and then I can glue it. And then after it's glued and it sets up is when we're going to actually start doing the rear of it. We're going to start doing the neck profile. Before I attach the fretboard, after I radius it, I need to do what I need to do as far as shaping this body up in areas like this by using a roundover bit. But before I can do that, I need to take care of these sections right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to a sander, and I'm going to sand these, and I'm going to put a gentle curve on it that matches on both sides. And what I can do to ensure that it's going to match is I can use my template and kind of curve it around something like this, and then draw a line, and then follow that line to sand it, so that way everything looks like it's supposed to look. And as long as it's even on both sides, nobody is any the wiser, which is really what this is all about. Because sometimes when you're building guitars, you kind of have to do things like this in order to make things work. It's not easy finding a piece of carina this big. So, you know, losing 1/8 of an inch on both sides, if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. So I'm going to take this to the sander and I'm going to give it that round over on both sides, and then we'll go ahead and we'll put the round over on the top. So I went ahead and I did my round over. For the most part, that's pretty good. I can always make that a little bit nicer a little bit later on down the line, but for the most part that's what I need in order to get that round over started when I put my router bit in there. But I'm also going right now to put my arm rest right here, and so I can grab let's see here, something like that. Draw a line. I can take this to the bandsaw. I can cut a lot of this off, or what I can do is I can just use my belt sander and just keep working it. And I think I'm just going to end up using my belt sander. So same thing, let me clamp this down so it doesn't go anywhere, and I can start belt sanding this and putting that armrest where I want it. I think I'm going to go a little bit more with that, and then as soon as I get this where I need it to be, I'll undo this, take my regular sander to kind of make it look a little bit better, and then we'll go ahead and we'll do the routing for the round over. So I have a good initial rough over for that, and now I can go ahead and do the round over for the rest of the top. Now, before I do that, I need to make sure, once again, that when this is placed on here, I don't go beyond the neck. So let me mark a couple of lines so that way I know where to stop with the round over. And I think in this case I'm going to be using this right here, which is about a 1/4 inch, maybe, yeah, it's about a 1/4 inch round over. And I'm going to be doing this across the top and the rear of the guitar. So let's go ahead and start the round over. And that is that. I'm going to do the same thing to the rear, but in the rear I have to do the belly cutout. Just like I ended up doing it up here, I have to do the belly cutout for here. And I'm going to use, once again, I'm going to be using the belt sander, getting that done. As soon as that is finished, I'll do the round over all the way around up to here, and then we'll start doing finishing up the neck. Okay, so I've got my fretboard ready, and this is getting ready to be glued on. Now, I could go through right now just to give myself a little bit of an easier time and put my side markers in, but I'm going to actually end up doing that a little bit later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that everything here lines up exactly like I want it to, which it does. I'm not worried about this extra stuff right here that's extending because this is going to get routed out. Okay, and now it's time to glue. Let's go ahead and put our truss rod in, and then during the time that this is setting up, I can't really do a whole hell of a lot to this until all the glue and everything is set. I'm pushing back here, and it feels like it needs to kind of go down just a hair. So I'm taking a 1/4 inch chisel and scraping just a little bit of that out. Okay, and let's see if that fixed it. And that pretty much did. Okay, so I'm just going to be using regular type bond on this. I'm not going to be using anything fancy. You can use, you can use epoxy Paul Reed Smith, I've seen them use epoxy on theirs. I don't really like using epoxy, but it's up to you. I find that tight bond works just fine. Okay, now we're going to take a brush here and kind of keeping about 1/8 of an inch away from the truss rod. You don't really have to, if you have enough glue, you're not going to have to worry about glue getting over there, because when we start compressing the fretboard onto the neck, some of that glue is going to herniate in that direction. But I don't want it to get inside of the truss rod cavity. Sometimes if it does, sometimes it's okay, nothing really bad happens. Other times it locks the truss rod in place. So I usually keep a safe distance, about 1/8 of an inch all the way around. And liquids you can't really compress. Okay, air you can, but not liquids. And that's the whole principle behind things like hydraulics and the way the brakes work in your car and stuff like that. And so when we are trying to compress the glue with the fretboard, it'll sooner herniate than get compressed. So it'll want to come out of the sides. And we want to make sure that we have a good coat of glue, so everything is going to get a nice dab of glue, but we don't want so much that we end up having a huge mess, as well as a bunch that goes inside the truss rod cavity. Okay, that right there is enough glue for what we're going to do. And I'm going to move this over here close to the edge of the countertop, and I'm going to gently set this in place. And now I'm going to grab a bunch of clamps as well as my radiusing blocks, and my radiusing blocks I'm going to put on top of this to make sure, because if I clamp just in the center, there's the possibility that the fretboard will curve up like this and I won't have a good seal. So, but if I have something that's curved that is getting clamped down, it makes sure that all the way across the fretboard we get a good seal. So we've got some clamps here. Let me get right next to the edge. Sometimes you have to get it started in the right spot, and then later on we can remove the initial clamp. But this is just making sure that this is exactly where you want it. Some people will drill a couple of holes, and they'll put like these little dowels inside of them, so that way this sits exactly where you want it, and then from there you can clamp it and you don't have to worry about it sliding. I honestly don't waste my time with any of that because I've never really needed it. So I'm going to put my 12-inch radius block up here. I'm going to put my 10-inch right here, but I'm going to start at this side and work my way down. And I'm going to say that that is good. Holding this in place while I start cranking this down, and you're going to see some of that glue herniate out of the side. It's important that during the time that you're doing this, that you are looking down the side, making sure that you have a nice tight seal between the fretboard and the neck. Also making sure it is not shifting at all. And I know it's a strange position of where the camera is right now, for you to be able to see exactly what's going on. But it's not more interesting from the view I have. Okay, so the important thing is you understand exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Clamping this also to the countertop here, to the router table, is also ensuring one other thing. Making sure that the fretboard and the neck are perfectly flat. Okay? Because if I glue this fretboard on and the neck is not perfectly straight or flat, then what happens is it kind of creates a bent neck. It creates a neck that you already have problems with it even before you start. Something that a truss rod adjustment might not even be able to fix. So when you attach your fretboard, you always want to make sure that the neck and the fretboard and everything are perfectly flat. Kind of start in one area and usually just keep traveling in the same direction, making sure everything's flat. In this case, you saw that I started here, but then I went over to here, and then I did this. I can get away with it because I'm dealing with a huge, thick piece of wood. Now let me come down here and make sure that we're getting good coverage, which I am. I see glue all the way down the side. We're doing good. It hasn't shifted. That's good. And let me see if I can get one more right here, just to make sure there's even pressure all the way across. And then down here next to the nut, I'm going to do the same thing. Next to the nut here, there's going to be a little bit of glue that's going to be wanting to pop out this way. I'm going to scrape that up with a chisel. I don't want that in the way. It's going to make my job a lot easier down the line if I don't have anything that gets in the way of my nut. Okay, like that. In areas up here, which you can't really see too well, but up in this area where this block is, ideally this block would not be in the way, and I'd be able to see what's going on the bottom and scrape up that glue as well. But because of the nature of the beast, I'm kind of stuck having to do it like this. So with that being said, I don't need this radius and block. It is now a waiting game. So let's let this set up, and then as soon as all the glue is dry, I'll turn the camera back on.
So the fretboard is glued on, and I have obviously removed it from the clamps. I had put the template back on, drawn where the holes go for the two knobs as well as the 5-way switch. Now the potentiometers have a post size, a post thickness that is 1/4 of an inch. But you don't want to make these 1/4 of an inch. They'll be too tight. You need to make it ever so slightly larger than 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to take the 1/4 of an inch bit out of the drill, get one that is ever so slightly larger, drill these two holes out. Then I'm going to put my slot in for the 5-way switch. And after that is done, then we can go ahead and route out the cavity for the rear, and we can also route out up here what's going on. And then pretty much the last thing that we'll end up needing to do that's going to require any type of like large power tools or whatever is finishing up the neck. And the neck and the headstock are going to be the things that I'm going to do last on this, just because it's going to really require the most amount of time. So let me go ahead and drill these two out, and then the holes for the 5-way switch, I'm going to wait before I drill those. I want to have that slot in first. And I don't need to go all the way through because I have to route out the cavity. This is just so when I start getting to a certain distance, when I'm routing out the cavity, I know when to stop. right? I know that the top of this will be the proper thickness. And after that's done is when I'll end up drilling inside here to get to the cavity. Okay. So now that that is complete, and for cutting in my fret slots, not my fret slots, I'm sorry, my 5-way switch slots, I have a jig here that I had made, and I cover this inside the jig video. But basically, all it is just a guide for a small router that I have. And I'm using a very, very thin bit here. This is a 1/16 of an inch. And by me putting this here, starting this, and then just dragging this back and forth a couple of times is going to make a perfect slot. An 1 5/8 is the distance between where these screws go on the 5-way switch, and I want to make sure that the distance here is the same. That's roughly ever so slightly less than 1/4 of an inch, okay, and that is 1/4 of an inch, okay. So it wouldn't hurt for this to be about right there, and this to come in ever so slightly. Okay. Now we need to make sure also that this is dead center of the 5-way switch, the line that we do. So I'm going to put a couple of new lines here just to make sure that I don't mess up. I'm going to be using a 3/16 drill bit. This should be good enough as far as the size. I want to make sure that this is exactly where I want it. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing down here. Okay, so now that that's done, the vast majority of headache is finished. But the biggest headache on a one piece is about ready to start. Okay, this portion I'm not going to have to worry about much more except for just the electronics cavity, which I can do a little bit later. Now it's time to do the neck. Okay, and what we're going to do with the neck is I've already drawn a line here, and so from the bottom of the fretboard to the bottom of this I've drawn 3/4 of an inch, and then I've drawn a line down it this way. I'm going to take this to the bandsaw and I'm going to try to remove as much as I can from down here, just to give my router bit a break, because I'm going to be using a router bit to shape the neck profile on the rear to make sure that it's consistent and all that other good stuff. But I want to try to remove as much of this as I can. I can only go so far because I have an upper horn up here that's going to get in the way of the blade. But so let me take this to the bandsaw. I'll remove as much as I can, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I have my bit on here, and this is going to be giving me my neck profile. Now, something's important. Before I just run this through, there's a few things I have to keep in mind. The first is I put a back angle on this neck, and because of that, if I were to just try to run this through, this end of the neck would be much thinner than up here because this is setting at a downward angle. So I have a piece of wood here that is roughly 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to put a piece of double stick tape between the headstock and this, which raises this end up. By doing that, what it essentially does is it evens this out, and it makes it where now this is pretty flat and the neck is going to be more consistent. This is still, near this area, is still going to be ever so slightly thicker and larger, but it's not going to be as dramatic. So A simple piece of double stick tape will do the trick. Just like that. Okay, but we're not done with our double stick tape yet, because now we have another problem, and that is, what is this bearing going to ride on? It can't really ride on the fretboard. Okay, there's not enough meat there, and if I do, it's going to end up kind of cutting into the fretboard a little bit as well, and it's going to be kind of an uncomfortable feel, simply because of the height of this bearing, of this router bed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pattern, a template that I had built right on top of this, making sure that there's no dust anywhere on this. Run this dead center. And this is the jig right here. And what this is going to end up doing is it's going to give me a couple of handles to hold on to during the time that I'm running this through, to make it safer, because I really don't like using large router bits that are exposed like this. But also what this is going to do is it's going to give this something for the bearing to ride on that is going to be ever so slightly wider than the fretboard itself. And that way I can make sure that this portion right here, the very, very top of this router bit, does not cut into the fretboard. Okay, so it's basically right there, and by me moving this, let me see, so it's basically right there. Okay, is where this goes. And this is also going to give me another benefit, because this has curves on it right here. When I start running that bearing down this, it's going to give me more of a gradual cut that goes into the neck. Now I'm going to set the height of this from this side. Okay, you can't see what I'm doing really, but all I'm doing is I'm going to be raising this bit up until it is the height that I'm actually looking for the neck profile. Okay, and that line that I had cut, that was 3/4 of an inch, I'm kind of using that as my reference and the base of this. Okay, and that looks pretty good. This is going to have a neck that is going to be similar to a Gibson feel to it. So let's go ahead and plug that in. Once again, a low speed, starting over here. And as you can see, it gives me a nice cut. And when I do the same thing on the other side, the vast majority of the neck is going to end up being cut out with the proper neck profile on it. This section up here is going to require some work, as well as this section that's down here, because I can't really go that far. Here in just a second, I have to take my router bit further into this, and this is going to require a little bit more strength, and you have to go a little slower, because it's going to be cutting into more wood, and the router bit's going to have to work harder. So, but I'm going to go ahead and do that, and as soon as this is finished, I'll end up turning the camera back on, and I'll show you how I'm going to finish up the neck. Okay, so now that the base of this has been routed out, as far as the neck profile goes, you're going to see that I've got a thin strip here. It's going to be easy to take care of. I've got a large portion right here, though, that I'm going to have to work quite a bit. I also have a section here, okay? And how we go about doing this is I need to cut off a little bit of extra down here, okay? So the actual profile from the rear stops at about right there, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the height of this just a little bit by giving it that. Coming over here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself right here, this upper portion is not finished, but I'm going to give myself up here a little bit more than a 1/2 inch, okay? Something like that. And with that little bit more than a 1/2 inch, I'm going to take this and I'm going to run it right about to the height of the 3/4 of an inch, which is right about here, okay? And this is closer to about 5/8 of an inch, the thickness right here, but the 3/4 is about right there. So this is actually going to be sticking out a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to the bandsaw. I'm going to cut that portion off, and it's going to make it a little bit easier for me to work with this particular section of the guitar. As soon as I'm done with that, this section, on the other hand, is not going to be easy to work, and I'm going to have to use chisels and all sorts of stuff to try to remove a large portion of this wood so I can get down there and I can start shaping it. So let me go ahead and take this to the bandsaw, cut this section out. I might even increase the angle of this on both of these. I'm not completely sure. I think I'm just going to leave that. But I'm going to take this to the bandsaw and I'm going to remove that chunk. So, before I turn this upside down and start actually trimming out some of this neck, because I'm going to clamp it to the table, I want to remove a portion of this fretboard that I don't need. And I'm going to be using a bit here. It's got a bearing on the bottom. Once again, it's just a template bit. And the blades are up here. I'm going to be using the cavity as my template. So let me set this to depth. Bring this down here. That should be good, and I'll go ahead and take care of this. I have to work this very slowly because ebony will have a tendency to splinter, so I have to be very slow. And so now I have a very nice and even fretboard that goes with the channel here. Now, this portion of the fretboard is actually, these little edges are actually going to end up getting cut off because I still have the pickup ring that sits here, and that pickup ring I'm going to end up cutting so I can fit my Allen wrench right in there to adjust the truss rod later. But this takes off that extra stuff that was aggravating me. And now, let me move some of this stuff out of the way. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp this upside down to the the tabletop, and then I'm going to move the camera, and then we're going to go ahead and start shaping this. Now, when it comes to shaping a neck, when it's in this stage here, okay, there's basically four main tools that I'm going to be using. The first is going to be a draw knife, and I use this a lot to remove stuff in areas like this. Also for fine shaping near the volute up here. A chisel, because I use a chisel to remove a large portion of the wood back here at first. A hammer to help me with that. And of course I'm going to be using a sander a little bit later on to fine tune everything. And it's going to look barbaric what I'm going to be doing at first, but it's just part of the program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be kind of making a line here that tells me about like where the scoop starts, and it's going to be kind of going down this way. I need to remove a large portion of this. So I'm going to be using a chisel here, and I'm going to start digging in to this wood and removing big chunks of it. Okay, and like I said, it's going to look barbaric, But there's really no other fast way to take care of this. We have to make sure that we are very careful, though, while we're doing this. We have to listen to the wood, see what direction it's breaking, how it's breaking, because it's possible that that break can start going in deeper into the neck, and we don't want that. We just want to break this large chunk off to where we can start shaping this. Now, let's say you don't have a router bit like I do and a router table like I do. You can literally use a wood rasp and a draw knife or a spoke shave and shape the back of your neck. You don't have to have the router. The router just speeds things up considerably, and it makes it more accurate. That was good. Okay, so we got a large chunk of that off, but I still need a considerable more removed. Down here, not so much. Up here, a little bit. Now, I can go ahead, use my chisel to get nice big chunks like that removed. But I could also use my belt sander to help me even shape the rear of the neck here, as well as remove some of this extra material that is just going to end up slowing me down. Okay, and as far as the chisel goes, I think that's about as far as I want to use the chisel. Okay, now at this point I could come in with my spoke shave and I'm sorry, this is a draw knife, not a spoke shave, and start working this. And of course this is a little dull, but I can just start pulling this and trying to start shaping this. It's a long time going. It's going to take a long time for me to do that. Okay, and I can do it on this side as well, obviously. And I do use this quite a bit when it comes to shaping the necks. I use this quite a bit. I'm going to end up using my belt sander to remove a large portion of this. So I'm going to use my belt sander to take care of a lot of this right here, and then I can fine tune it with my other sander and my draw knife. Okay, so I don't really want to go much further with the belt sander than that, okay? Because I'm kind of getting, it smells like garlic in here. Because I'm getting into an area where if I go any further, it could turn pretty bad, okay? So I'm going to start, once again, using my draw knife to kind of start shaping this, getting large portions of the wood off, giving it an initial shape, and when I start getting closer to everything being exactly how I want it, that's when I'm going to start using my orbital sander to finish up the shaping. But first, let me take down this center. And this is where the patience and the artistic carving ability comes into play, because we've got to match, we've got to give ourselves a nice gradual change between what the router did and what we have up here. And it takes a while to shape this, and it's important to not just go by the way that it looks, but you have to run your hand over it, and you're always going to feel the imperfections. You might not be able to see them, but you'll be able to feel them. And the way that the guitar feels is very important, and a guitarist is going to pick it up. They're going to pick up the smallest imperfections. So make sure that you go over this very carefully. Now, this shaping that I'm doing right here is probably going to take me about 25 to 30 minutes, okay? So instead of leaving the camera on for that whole time and boring you with what I'm doing, I'm going to go ahead and just turn it back on after I'm done shaping the base and I get ready to start shaping up here. Now, just keep in mind that during the time that I'm doing this, I'm looking at it, I'm trying to get that gradual fade between the neck and the body. I'm running my hands down it. This feels horrible right here, okay? Up here feels a little bit better, but there's still a lot of work. I can still feel a difference in transition. So I got to keep working this. But as soon as I'm finished, I'll turn the camera back on, I'll show you the end result, and then we'll start working up here. So I have a lot of it removed here. And I'm going to take an old piece of sandpaper and putting tension on it, I'm going to drag this over the top of the rear of the neck. And this puts a curve on the sandpaper, and this is going to make the transition feel even more unnoticeable. Okay, this is going to even a lot of stuff out. And of course, after I'm done using a grit like this, I'm going to end up using a much softer grit. Where the edges are sharp, I'm going to just come in here by hand and try to knock those down a little bit so it's not so abrupt. Okay, kind of feeling that. It's sharp on this side. Okay, for the most part, let me look at it. For the most part, I would say that we're doing pretty good. I think the rest of it can be done with 220 during the final sand, so that way it feels a lot more comfortable. And keep in mind, this is the section that the hand is going to be at, the lower portion, not up here. Okay, so if up here is slightly not as round, I guess you could say, it's okay, just as long as it's comfortable and it doesn't hinder the player in any way from being able to hit the notes that they would like to hit. So that's pretty good, and like I said, I'm going to end up finishing that off with the fine sanding. The basic roughing up is good enough. If I wanted to, I could come in here with a belt sander once again, take even more out, okay? But honestly, I don't see the need for that. After I'm done shaping this, I'm going to pick it up and hold it, pretend like I'm playing it, and if it feels like I need to remove more, I will. But I think that this is going to be okay. So what we have here is the stuff that is roughed out. Same thing, I'm just going to end up using the sander to kind of come in here and shape this Okay, so right there, I'm going to take my sandpaper again, and with it slightly curved, and I'm going to come in here and do the exact same thing. This technique right here really helps you get that neck to have a nice smooth transition, and also keeps it prevents flat spots on the neck too. Okay. The rest of this I can get when I do my fine sanding right before I get ready to finish it. Now where I cut this right here, I'm going to use the belt sander just to try to even it out. Okay, and now the rest of this I can kind of shape by hand down here, where I can have a transition between the volute and the rear of the headstock. I want to knock down any sharp edges, because if anything is going to chip or splinter, it's going to be coming from things like that, from sharp edges. And it also just looks a little bit nicer when you have a nice smooth transition. Okay. Okay, so this has been flattened. It's been sanded, rough sanded, to the point that I think that it's going to be good enough. And now I'm going to end up putting my neck template on here. I've already got the locations of where everything is supposed to go as far as the tuners. And I'm going to clamp this in place. Okay. Got to make sure that everything's lined up. Okay. Make sure this doesn't want to shift. Very good. And now I'm going to use my marking tool. And this marking tool fits right inside here. And it's got a nail that I had sharpened and centered. And it fits right in. I give it a tap, and then this gives me a nice starting location for my brad tipped drill bits. And with these, with this particular guitar, a lot of my headstocks anyway, I end up using a Forstner bit first, and I countersink the tuners. So, not sure if you can see it, but we got some dots right here, and that's a good thing. And I want to make sure that these are even. So I come over here. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And I just want to make sure that those are even. So, but we have a thickness here. And like I said before, I usually make my headstocks a little thicker because I want to make sure they never break. Adds a little bit of mass, which in turn is going to add a little bit of sustain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Forstner bit that is 3/4 of an inch. And a Forstner bit looks like this, for those that don't know. This one is 5/8, but I need one that's 3/4. And I'm going to, actually no, I don't need one that's 3/4, because I'm not planning on putting a finish on this except for a oil finish, and 5/8 is probably big enough. So I don't know, I'm going to think about that, but I'm going to go down with this first, and I'm going to set it to depth so it gives me the proper height here, that I know I can attach my nuts to the tuners here appropriately. Because if I just try to stick those in there and I don't countersink this, I'll never be able to attach the nut to the tuner. So I need to kind of cut down this, and the thickness of this is dependent on the width of the washer. Okay, so 5/8 is probably what I'm going to use, but I generally will use 3/4. Okay, yeah, I think, just to be safe, I'm going to use my 3/4, which is this right here. And let me go ahead and set this up on the drill press, and then I'll change the angle of the camera so you can see exactly what I'm doing and what I'm talking about. So I have the drill bit where it'll stop at the appropriate depth, right? And what I'm going to do is, by using that initial pilot dot, by holding, let me shift this because I don't want anything in my way. This is going to find the center of that little spot that I hit with the hammer in my tool, and it'll guide it in there. So now you'll see that I have this where they're countersunk, and now there's new holes that I can use to drill out the rest of the tuning holes. So now we're going to end up drilling all the way through, and when we drill all the way through, we need to make sure that we have a backing, because if we just try to drill through, it's going to chip out back here. Okay, so you always want to make sure that you have a solid backing underneath it. And I'm going to be shifting the base as well after every drive through, because if there's anything missing from where this gets drilled, it'll chip out as well. So let me go ahead and kind of make sure this is in a good spot. Okay, and you'll see by me doing that, I don't have any chip out at all, but it did create a small little dimple there. So I'm going to shift this just a little bit, and then now I can do the next hole. Okay, now this I went ahead and I did it off camera because I felt that it was redundant, because I went ahead and I routed out the electronics cavity, and I felt it was redundant because I was doing it the exact same way as I did the pickups. Okay, the pickup cavities. The only difference is this is much deeper. And then I stopped right when there was about 1/8 of an inch or so left. That way I can make sure that no matter what I end up putting inside here as far as my electronics, my pots and stuff, I can make sure I can thread it. Plus, and the most important is really about the 5-way switch, because if this portion is too thick, the 5-way switch isn't going to really want to work. It's going to end up stopping. It's going to end up hitting the sides. That's no good. You need it to be kind of thin, but you don't want it so thin that it can crack, that it can break, that it's not strong enough. And 1/8 of an inch is right about right. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but you got to do it. But now at this point, I'm going to end up putting the channel in for the cavity cover. And the way that I do that is I use a large rabbet bit like this, and I just put a smaller bearing on there. Now, when I bought this, the bearing was much larger. It was the size of this right here. But what I'm going to do, well, not what I'm going to do, is what I've done is I put a smaller bearing on here. So now when this goes around the outside, it's going to give me a nice, right around 1/4 inch that I can put screws into and make the cavity to the same level as the body itself. Now we want this, because of the type of plastic that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be doing this right around 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so let me bring this over here, start lowering it until it's right around 1/8 of an inch. Okay, turn it on. We'll do a test. We'll do a pass, a test pass. looking at that, that is close. That's close, but it needs to be a hair, whoa, a hair deeper. Let me see, right around there. We're going to try this. And I'm going to call that good. That looks right to me. And this, yeah, this is really close to 1/8 of an inch. And that's good. Now you'll notice that I ended up doing this before I drilled any holes for the input jack, or I'm sorry, output jack, as well as any holes that are coming from the pickup areas. And the reason why is because there's a bearing there, right? And I don't want that bearing to accidentally hit an area that I had drilled and then make this where it doesn't actually follow the shape here. And this shape, this is a large cavity, but this is also one that I use for when I put my VIPs in and I put a kill switch and stuff like that. So it leaves room for later on down the line if you do want to upgrade this. It only requires a couple of holes to be drilled and we're golden. So at this point, what do we have left? Okay. At this point, the only thing we really have left is drilling a couple of holes, okay, and doing our finish sanding, as well as locating our bridge, creating a nut, putting our frets on, okay. Now, let me move some of this stuff out of the way. Now that we've got, this is pretty much as far as I'm going to take it for this particular video, and I'm going to explain why. As far as the finishing and stuff goes, that's covered in the guitar building course. Okay. As far as the installation of the pickups and the electronics and all that other stuff, winding pickups, it's in the guitar building course. As far as how to fret your fretboard, it's inside the guitar building course. I mean, everything from here on in is in the guitar building course. And this is more of an addition to the guitar building course for those that want to experiment or try to build their own one-piece guitar. It's not to replace the guitar building course. But I will show you a little bit about drilling holes here, because it's not always easy. Now, ultimately, when doing that, you want to have a very long bit. Okay, you don't want to have a very short bit. If you have a short bit, a lot of times you're going to end up damaging the pickup areas here. It'll be too sharp of an angle. If I have it where it is a long bit, I can be about at this angle from a distance, and I can drill that hole inside there without damaging anything. Now, because these are not going to be VIPs, which have much more wires, I can get away with using a drill bit that's about this size right here. And you can do this with a, you wouldn't use a drill press for this. And I have found that if you clamp the guitar down, it gives you a little bit more control over the actual drilling. Okay, and you want this to, ideally this would be perfectly straight going in, but that's going to be a physical impossibility. So what you do is you get as close as you can to the bottom, trying to keep this fairly level, making sure that you don't hit here. Okay. And now we have one hole drilled, and I'm going to do the exact same thing here, except I'm going to be more at an angle this direction, heading towards the cavity. There we go. And that's how we go about doing that. Now, as far as the
if we had a center pickup in here, what I would have done is I would have drilled it out before I put my fretboard in, and because that way I could have gone this direction, right, with it. But now we have a couple of holes that are inside here that it's going to fit our wire just right. And now we have to put the output jack in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the area which would be best for the output jack, and I think it would be right there. And we want this to be centered. That is pretty centered right there. Let me put this in a spot that's not going to get in the way. Now my particular output jacks are 5/8 of an inch. And what I do is I use a Forstner bit that is 5/8 of an inch. And I want this to be down about 1/8 of an inch. But the actual tube of it, the actual barrel, is a 1/2 inch. But I've got that starter hole, so now I'm going to take my 1/2 inch bit and there we go. Perfect timing too, because the battery was about ready to die in my drill. Okay. So at this point, it really is all about finish sanding, putting on the oil, and doing the fret. This for the most part is finished. For the most part, this is finished. There's a couple of small things here and there that I need to do. Like I said, I need to cut these areas off. And I'm going to be using a fine saw for that, just so that way when I put my pickup rings on there, it gives me that room. Okay, but that's that, guys. That, you know, this building a one-piece guitar is not that different from building any other guitar. The key to it is making sure that the wood is cured, making sure that the wood has a grain pattern that is not going to be detrimental to what you're trying to do. At the end of the day, and I want you to think about this, ultimately, what is the difference between having a neck that is made out of wood, that is set in a body that's made out of wood, right, or one that is just one piece? What really is the difference? Why would one want to warp more than the other, right? Why should it? And that question is answered quite simply. It shouldn't. It shouldn't, as long as the wood is cured correctly, as long as you have a good grain pattern. Now, what the hell was that? I still have about 3 to 3.5 hours worth of work on this before it's finished, before I can sit there and say, okay, yeah, it's time that I can sell this. But before I end the video, even though I cover this in the guitar building course, I'm going to go over it with this as well, just to give you a little bit more of a complete picture in case you don't have the guitar building course. But quite honestly, you really need it. There's nothing that's going to replace that. And as I mentioned before, this is an addition. This is supplement to the guitar building course. It does not replace it. But let's figure out the position of the bridge. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get some tape, and I'm going to put it right here. So I'm going to take some tape. I'm going to put a couple of pieces here, something like this. Okay. And this is how we're going to figure out exactly where our bridge is going to set.
And the first thing that we're going to do, now I just want to show you with this back angle, see when I put this and I follow this up, this gives me about 3/8 of an inch distance from here to here. And that's about what we need, because after I put my frets on here, and which is going to be at least 1/8 of an inch high, and plus we have the action height, this is going to take it up to a little bit beyond 1/2 inch. And a typical hardtail bridge is somewhere between 3/8 and 1/2 inch high. So if we didn't put that back angle on, this would be much lower, and I would have to countersink the bridge, which is not, we don't want to do that. So I'm going to take this straight edge, and I'm going to run it down the side here, and I'm going to cruise up just like this. I'm going to do this on both sides. Okay. Now with that being done, we have to find center, but we have the center here, so we can cruise over here and we can measure and find the center. This is, if I move this ever so slightly here, this is 2 3/8, and that is right there for our center. And we can do the same thing right up here. Okay, and this time it's 2 1/2, so I'm going to go 1 1/4. And I can also run this down the center of the neck, finding center of the fretboard, and then running it down as well. And this will give us our center line. And you need to know your center line. But we also need to know what our scale length is. And in this particular case, it's 25 1/2 inches. So I'm going to come over here, finding center roughly, finding center right there. 25 1/2 is right here. Okay, that is where the string needs to come off of the saddle. Okay, what you want to do is you want to go 25 5/8, and that is going to be the low E. That is where the low E is going to be coming off of the saddle. And I've got a square here, and I'm going to run this basically just like that. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that the distance between the pickup cavity and this is also the same, even though it's more important that the distance from the nut in here is the same. But what we do is we come over and we measure, so we know that this is almost 1 inch. And I come over here and same thing, it's almost 1 inch. So let's go ahead and carry this over. We'll make another straight line like that. Okay, now we're almost there. Now let's say that this is going to be the bridge that we're going to use. Okay, what we need to do is we need to find the halfway mark on the low E and twist the intonation adjustment to where this falls halfway on there. Where the fuck are my screwdrivers? So then, because this is back way too far, and this is actually what would end up happening if you go by 25 1/2 inches. Okay, so I'm gonna go about right there. Okay, where I've got about 1/8 of an inch to play. Okay, and I'm gonna put this now where the center line is going to go through the center drill hole, which you can't really see. Let me bring this down a little bit. Okay, this center line is going through this center drill hole, and the front of this center line is going through the center of these saddles. And I'm going to move this forward until the 25 5/8 falls on the center of that particular saddle for the low E. In fact, I'm going to move this back ever so slightly and bring this forward. And by doing so, this right there is exactly where I'd want to mount this. So from here, I would mark where these holes go, making sure that this is square. You measure the the distance between the front edge of this and perhaps the front of your 24th fret, or the front of this and the pickup cavity. The problem with measuring the pickup cavity is over a period of time the templates start breaking down. And like on this particular one, there's an ever so slight little breakdown. And so this is not perfectly straight anymore. And so if I start measuring off of this, it could give me a false measurement. And I don't want that. But typically, as long as you have your center correct, and you can line up where the hole is in the rear plus is where the center is as far as the saddles, it generally lines itself up where it's perfectly square. And also we can measure, we can look at the outside of where these lines are, of where the neck was coming out, and we can see that right here this lines up to the outside of that saddle, and this lines up to the outside of this saddle. So we know when we put the strings on this, it's going to be dead perfect. It's going to be dead nuts, and that's exactly what we want. We know that we're not going to have any intonation problems because we have this at the 25 and 5/8, not 25 and a half. If you go by 25 and a half and you haven't adjusted for the low E, because the low E always sits back further. If you haven't adjusted for that, you're going to end up having intonation problems. You're going to bring this back all the way, and you're going to run out of room, and you're going to have to remove the spring and all sorts of nonsense. So it's better to just to go by the 25 and 5/8, and you're going to be just fine. You're going to be just fine if you do that. You know, but it's never wrong to double check and triple check and all that other stuff. So we're golden, guys. We're golden. This is how you build the one-piece guitar. Everything from here is cake. It's just like you would do anything else. It's just, you know, sanding with 220 grit, making everything exactly like you want it to be before you finish it. You know. So if you haven't got the guitar building course, and some of the things that I'm talking about in this video are kind of going over your head, get the guitar building course. It's probably close to about anywhere from 9 to 11 hours of content, okay? And that it goes over everything. It goes over everything. And you'll understand everything that I'm doing and why I'm doing it, okay? But this is supplemental. This is not to replace it. But hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully it took some of the mystery out of it. You'll see that there is no reason to put a whole bunch of carbon rods and all this other stuff that some people do, you know, when they're building one-piece guitars. You can build your neck just like you always do. Make sure that the wood is in good grain pattern, and make sure it is cured. It's the curing that really is probably more important than anything. But grain is really important too, because if you have grain, like I mentioned first in the video, that's going in a lot of weird directions, you might be asking for a lot of problems a little bit later on down the line. Straight grain, straighter the better, drier the better, and as long as you do that, it's going to be just fine. So anyway, that is that, and I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'd like to also thank you for purchasing this video, and stay tuned because I'll probably have more instructional videos in the future. So until next time, take care.